Good. Yeah, we're recording now. All right. So basically what we're talking about here is the way in which this delusion that constructs a sense of self on the basis of imputing reality onto the subjective dimension, which is in fact what we can see, is constructed of many, many different aspects, both body and mind, and also, of course, in regards to the phenomenal world. But particularly then, this notion of self is then what gives rise to what we call kleshas or defilements, which is then, once there's a self, then we're in relation to perceptions, we have attachment and aversion. And these then, when we act on these attachments and aversion, this is ingrained in terms of then patterns of action. So this is then what we call karma. So that's why we would say that which drives suffering universally are the various styles of toxic conditioning psychologically, which is then what we call kleshas, and then the patterns that emerge on the basis of us acting on these patterns is what we call karma. So if we want to get to the bottom of these, then we look at this notion of self, and that's when 44, referring to the path of rejecting these, what constitutes really the cause of suffering, namely ignorance, kleshas, and karma. It says here, the path of those rejecting them, the beings of middle scope, consists in driving in the chariot of the four truths. They actualize cessation, reaching supreme freedom, the state that lies beyond all suffering. And that's where the Four Noble Truths that we have in the Buddhist teaching are so essential, because they are really about identifying that the cause of suffering can be removed, and as such then there's freedom to be attained. So you could say the natural condition of our being is free from suffering, and yet on the basis of this delusion we perpetuate suffering. So it makes sense to look at this delusion and the foundations for this delusion. And we're going to be looking more at that, particularly in the context of something we call the 12 links of dependent origination. But just right now, we're looking at the very core, really, of our sense of self, which is then constructed, as we saw last time, on the basis of this clinging to the self. So that's where it said, we looked at last time then, the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, that also, just like, and this is universal to all the various Buddhist vehicles, it doesn't matter if we're talking the Theravadan tradition or Zen or whatever, all of them universally across the board, they understand that the sufferings of samsara come from this delusional, essentially appropriation or imputation of a self on the basis of this, you could say, infinite set of constructs, which is our body and our mind. So quoting here then, it says, the Shravakas, and this is from the commentary of Khenpo Yöpen Gyatso, it says, the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas know that all existence, the universe and creatures, are like the shimmering of a mirage, a flash of lightning, the fiery path of a torch whirled in the wind. They are constantly fluctuating, evanescent, and painful by their nature. Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas understand also that these very sufferings are unaccompanied by a self, and thereby eradicate the ignorance of wrongly conceiving otherwise. They sever the stream of karma and emotion and reach the state that is beyond all suffering, inwardly relying on the wisdom that realizes no self, which is itself the truth of the path. And this is the important point, really, where we realize that if we analyze that there is no self. So this is something that we need to spend time on. For us who come from a non-Buddhist background, then this kind of logic, first of all, is completely new and alien to us. And also the way in which the logic is established is sometimes very difficult to follow. So when we're studying a text that was written by Tibetans or Indians, they'll proceed along a sort of logical procedure in which many of us are just left behind, slightly baffled, but then they look like nice guys. So we choose to just sort of follow along. And that's where we probably need to use some time on some of these basics. We could, of course, proceed and said, oh yeah, I've studied this and so on, but it would be a little bit dishonest if we haven't really wholeheartedly engaged in this. And that's where we need to sort of analyze these paradoxes in the way that we sort of say, my body. But then again, my body, yes, it is my body, but is it really something that I own? And in that sense, then, can I really say this is my body? Do I really control my body? Or am I something else beside my body? Well, not really. I'm not outside of my body. I'm also not the person in control. I also not am the body. So there is definitely a whole dimension of, you could say, my relationship to my body. And similarly also, when we have feeling, there's like and dislike. Is that truly what I am? This like and dislike? No, they're just passing feelings. And what I like one day, I might not like the next day. What I dislike one day, all of a sudden I might change my mind and like it. And so on the basis of that also, the narratives that I weave in terms of this is something that I really like, and there's a lot to be said about that, and so forth. This is good. What I don't like is bad, and so forth. And all the impulses that come with that, they change based on if we're children, if we're adults, if we're being mature about things or being immature about things. So we can see all of this relationship in which we're essentially establishing an I is essentially just a lot of different ever-changing conditions that does end up constituting a sense of self. But if we analyze, there's nothing solidly there. And that's why we have these images, just like we would say, it's like a mirage. There's actually nothing there. There's something that appears, and yet if we analyze, there's not actually solidly what appears to be. Like if we twirl a torch fast, it looks like there's a ring of fire, but we know there's not. Children would look at it and say, wow, there's a ring of fire. But if we analyze, there's actually, we investigate. Or if we're mature individuals like adults, we just know it appears like a ring of fire, but it's not. Similarly with the examples of a paper tiger and so forth. So all of this amounts to us as part of the journey for us to actually engage in, you could say, the wisdom that is part and parcel of what we refer to as the path to enlightenment. We need to actually investigate. And that's where it then says here, the wisdom, they, meaning those who practice the path, they sever the stream of karma and emotion, the kleshas, and reach the state that is beyond all suffering. And here's the important part, because inwardly relying on the wisdom that realizes no self, which is itself the truth of the path. Now, we shouldn't think the wisdom that realizes no self, well, that might just dawn on me one day. I'll be meditating and then all of a sudden I'll realize no self. Or maybe we think, oh, that's very nice. The teacher, the Buddha or the Guru, he has realized no self. That's good enough. I'd just like to hang around the Guru and so forth. But if we notice, the Guru is not a savior, the Guru is a teacher. And so the teacher, just the Guru, the wishes, just like the Buddha, wishes to teach us something, to show us something. And that's why we can't just hold on to mom and dad and say, gosh, I feel safe now. Mom and dad, they actually want to show us that what we're afraid of, we're having fever, right? They want to really, they want, the fever to recede. And so we can see that there is actually nothing to be afraid of. Or maybe what we're doing in this case is actually looking, is there really something there? So here there's a quote from Nagarjuna from Letter to a Friend, which says, birth is suffering, and the cause of this is craving. The abolition of this cause is freedom or cessation, gained by following the Eightfold Noble Path. So this, of course, is something that's big. It doesn't just about our discomfort, but it's about the whole way in which we construct our world, or lifetime after lifetime. And that's where the very nature of us moving into new situations with a sense of self is what drives, is a condition of suffering. And that's where we begin with the notion of birth. We come into situation after situation, lifetime after lifetime, with the same ignorance, essentially creating a pattern of suffering. And so when we talk about birth here, we look, where does birth come from? Well, birth comes from this craving or this hunger. Just like, of course, when we talk about birth in terms of a human life, that's one way of coming into a new situation with a new body. But there's also birth that takes place within every moment. So this is not something where we have to wait till we get reborn again, but it's something that we can actually analyze and see how it works within our immediate reality. Basically, we can see how we bring this sense of self, and in varying degrees, more or less rigidly, we carry that into new situations, and we unchallenged this insecurity and the pain of our ignorance we bring from moment to moment, from situation to situation. So that's what we refer here to in terms of birth. The way to get rid of that, the abolition of this cause, is freedom or cessation. And that's where what we talk about in terms of enlightenment, in terms of freedom, is when we begin to rid ourselves of that. And we can do it. We need to have that wisdom, like it talks about here, the wisdom that realizes no self. But that's not something that like I said, it's not just going to come or the guru has it. But it's something that comes on the basis of what we're doing right now, to actually analyze and to look. And when we have that and it becomes clear, then we understand what it is we're doing when we meditate. How meditation is the antidote for us carrying this ignorance from moment to moment. So that's where initially we need to at least begin to, you could say, burst that belief in a solid self. So it says here, now, of course, what we're speaking about is then the practice of the path. It says, in the same way that people riding a chariot progress to their destination by recognizing suffering and discarding its origins, which is then the fixation on the self, realizing cessation, which is then the freedom, and implementing the path. So understanding that this condition can be worked with, we practice the path. Practitioners practice and gradually progress through the 5 paths of the Hinayana. This way of proceeding occurs also in the Mahayana, and it is vital to understand it. So again, the path here is defined in terms of the progression that we go through as we journey on the path. So that's where, in the case of here, we talk about the 5 paths. Sometimes we talk about the 5 bhumis. In Vajrayana, we have various ways of talking about these various paths as well. Anyway, the point is that there's a progression that takes place, but it needs to begin with this understanding. So that's where here it quotes Vasubandhu advises us to advises us to bind our minds with the vows of pratimoksha, which is first a lifestyle, simplifying our lifestyle. Pratimoksha means the individual liberation, and it's really the foundation of, you could say, the disciplined lifestyle. It's sometimes associated with the monastic vows, but it really also applies to lay people. It's essentially vows that enable us to have, you could say, a sane lifestyle. Then he says, then to hear and study the general instructions and the special teachings on no self, and to meditate on this until deep conviction is attained. So that's where what we're doing here. Let's assume that we all have a reasonably sane lifestyle. We are on the path. We're just not crazy people doing crazy things. We're sort of, probably most of us have some degree of a disciplined lifestyle. And then we're listening to the teachings. So we're hearing, studying these general instructions, and especially then the teachings on no self. And we then meditate on this until deep conviction is attained. To this end, we should destroy the 20 wrong views associated with identifying with the perishable aggregates of the I, pondering well the sense of Nagarjuna's Shulaka, in which it says, form is not the I, the Lord has said, and I is not possessed of form. Within the I, the form does not inhere, and form is not the dwelling place of I. The other aggregates, please understand the likewise void. So I just looked a little bit around something that could be helpful for us, and just came up with a few things that is quite helpful. First of all, we also, those who have studied the Madhyamika and the Chandrakirti, the introduction to the middle way, there's a place really where he also emphasizes how this is really essential. Chandrakirti says, seeing that all faults and afflictions without exception arise from the view of the transitory collection. Transitory collection meaning this thing that we right now have, this body, which is, and the mind, which is continually in flux, and yet we attribute a solid self to that. He says, understanding that the object of that view is the self, yogis refute the self. So we're not talking about sort of blasting it away with some chemical or some device or some positive narrative or whatever, but it's about us actually investigating and seeing the delusion. This is something that is practically unknown within our culture, this way of sort of, well, it is actually when we have delusional fixations, you know, sometimes we have obsessions or we have unfounded anger and so forth, we can actually sit down and think, yes, I actually have no reason to be angry or I have no reason to be obsessed. But this is a little bit different because it goes right to the heart of our sense of self. So it's very different. In some way we have it if we sort of morally, if we discover, for example, we've been very selfish. And then we feel a bit embarrassed and we just sort of ponder, you know, need I be so selfish or need I be so one way or another? And that's where maybe we can look inward and we can see there's an issue there. But we're going a bit further here. We're actually establishing there actually is no self. So this is radical. So that's where we have this quote about form is not the I and so forth. And actually with the help of a Acharya, Andy Carr, who wrote a wonderful book called Discerning, what is it again? I think it's called Discerning Reality. In there, it's a book that actually we studied some years ago in one book study, but anyway, he says in there, okay, let's say we look at this verse, yeah, it says, form is not the I, the Lord has said, meaning the Buddha. So that the form is not the I. So the first, and if you look here, I think it's based on Andy's thing. The first is the idea that we are the particular phenomena, meaning we are the particular, in this case, skanda, yeah? So that's where we say this form is me. Is that really, that's where we question this form, this sense of body. Is that me? Not really. You know, we're not exactly that. You know, we look at the nails, we look at the hand. Is that me? You know? You know? First of all, the body is so many different things. So is that really me? And this is what we need to ponder. You know, maybe sit down with a mirror, just look, is that really me? We're attached to this. We're definitely connected with it. But is it really me? Then there's the second one. The second is that we possess this phenomena in the sense of this is something I am external to this body and I control it. Is that also the case? Well, in that case, then we would probably not choose to get old and die. Yeah, we actually don't have control over this body. It's, again, not as if we're the bosses of this. So we can't say this. Here's a little bit archaic language. I is not possessed of form, meaning we're not the owners of the body. And then again, within that body, is it within the body that we find the self? So that's where the third is that we are supported by the phenomenon thinking, I exist based on form. Self is a continuum based on the skandha of form. That also, am I based on the form? Not really. If so, then this form is so many different things. Is that me? Is that all I am? Of course, nowadays there is sort of a general idea that we are just brains and so forth. So in fact, this reflection is quite relevant in terms of, is that really valid? Am I just nothing more than just this 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 body, or is this body sort of the basis for I? Well, we can ask ourselves, but the thing is, we actually need to go with it, go all the way through, and actually arrive at a conclusion. So we can say, am I no more than just, and you could say, this form? And in that case, we also apply it to the other skandhas, as well as also, am I the feeling, that like and dislike? And then we have then also the idea that there's a self, there's a me, and then the body is, and all the other skandhas are supported by this me. So that's where fourth is that the phenomena are supported by us, thinking form exists based on me, that the continuum of the sense of this me, that is what then gives rise to the continuum of form and the other skandhas. So that's where it says, the last line up there, we saw, the other aggregates, please understand, are likewise void. So that's where we can see there is actually no self in all of this. There's no unitary, permanent, and unconditional self that we can, you could say, that we can base on the basis of these various skandhas. We want to dislodge this rigidity around self. So this is a reflection that's really important. Chandrakirti then writes, the Vajra-like realization of selflessness destroys the apprehension of self, and at the same time, the 20 lofty peaks of the mountainous view of the transitory collection. These are completely destroyed as well. So with the understanding of no self, we're free from this, what drives our sort of clinging to the self, and also the idea that we have here, essentially these four aspects that can be applied to all the five skandhas, they're destroyed as well. So this is something that's, you could say, rather mind-blowing and very important. Of course, we could say, well, I don't want to know any of this, but at least then think this is the remarkable, you could say, this is the remarkable science that really is basic to the Buddhist journey. And this is why we study the teachings. And this is also why we meditate on the teachings. It's not as if we just sort of all of a sudden have a philosophical understanding of this, but it's really something that needs to, you could say, settle into us. We need to become familiar with it. And it's then on the basis of that when we're sitting meditating and thoughts arise, I like this, I don't like that we can actually let it go. We've already established that the whole drama is originates with this strong sense of me. So if we establish that the self doesn't exist, then the whole tension around things happening to me and the drama of me becomes less important. And so when we're practicing meditation, we are continually coming back to just the simplicity of the experience of the present. And that's where the normal engagement, as we do it in our sort of distracted, unaware state, it's understood as something that is really flawed. So that place where we understand that we are essentially naively falling for something that is not valid is essential really for us to understand what it is that we are curing, what it is that we're healing. So So that's where then Khenpo Gyatso, he continues, firmly convinced of this, the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas follow the Eightfold Noble Path. This okay, so that's where, on the basis of that, the remedy for this situation is then the practice of the path. So here we talk about the Noble Eightfold Path. This comprises of right view, a stainless wisdom, free from the afflictions, right livelihood, the abandonment of all evil ways of making a living, right effort, the four genuine restraints, right mindfulness, which is not to forget the object of concentration and its accompanying attitudes. In other words, the four close mindfulnesses, right concentration, the four samadhis and so forth, the foundation of the Noble Path, right speech, the four positive verbal actions, right conduct, the repudiation of the three negative actions of the body, and right thought, virtuous states of mind such as benevolence. The attainment of liberation depends exclusively upon one's own efforts. In the Shulika, again, Nagarjuna says, freedom thus depends upon yourself. No friend can help you to accomplish it. Work hard in learning, concentration, discipline, and in the four truths, train yourself. So that's where we then understand what really is the reason for the path, understanding selflessness and all the aspects of the path that are mentioned here. We won't go into the details, are really the basis for which we engage in the path. Okay. So this is about the foundations of, you could say, the Buddhist path, what we call the Hinayana. So these are what we call Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. It's not really as if we can look out there and find Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, but it's more ways in which we engage in the path. So we're all we all start off as Shravakas, we all start off as Pratyeka Buddhas. But initially then, on this path that we call the Hinayana, the main concern is really beginning to become conscious of and relating to our own particular delusion. So it's very much the narrow path that doesn't allow for sidetracks. So Hinayana in this sense is not really derogatory, but it's really just understanding that we initially need to begin at this place of working with ourselves. So then it says that yet, referring to the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, yet they do not strive for the welfare of others. And this is where eventually we need to move out of the concern merely about our own liberation and then move on to being concerned with the liberation of others. So it says they train themselves on the path of freedom and achieve cessation, the exhaustion of all that is overcome through seeing and meditation. So that's the outcome of this path. They reach primordial wisdom wherein they know that all afflictions have been overcome and will never arise again. They pass beyond suffering into nirvana, whether with or without remainder, and thus attaining supreme liberation untouched by defilement. Let's just see what the footnote says about 42. Nirvana with remainder occurs when cessation takes place in the course of the practitioner's life. The skandha of that life, the remainder, continue until the karmic seed that are the cause of its existence are exhausted. The arhat then dies, at which point nirvana remains without remainder occurs. All karma is exhausted and the impure psychophysical continuum terminates. So this is how the Buddha, or this is the understanding of the arhat. And also arhats would then see the Buddha as an arhat. So this is how sometimes you have references to the Buddha as only really attaining, you could say, perfect nirvana at the time of death. So this is one particular way in which the teaching is represented. It says here, according to their tradition, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas believe that they will attain arhatship simply through following their own path alone, and that entering this expanse of cessation, they will remain there forever. So this is essentially then why we call it Hinayana, because they're just concerned about personal peace at that stage. Now counter that then, it says here, the Mahayana teachings, however, say that after abiding in cessation for a period commensurate with their accumulations of merit and wisdom, the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas will arise in the Buddha fields, Sukhavati for example, in the heart of lotus flowers. Because of their ingrained propensity to nescience and their subtle cognitive obscuration, they remain enclosed in the lotus flower for a period of 7 years. The thing about, you could say, Buddha nature is even if you go into this sort of numbed state or peaceful state, which is just a peaceful state, really, sooner or later, you could say the luminosity or the clarity, the innate disposition of enlightenment awakens. And this is then what is referred to here in terms of arising within a Buddha field. Yeah. See Kenshin Kunsang Palden, the Nectar Manjushri speaks, where it says, Arhats do have a non-afflictive ignorance, and the Shravakas themselves admit, on account of which the knowledge of objects is impeded through the effects of time and space. Since they do not have perfect realization of emptiness, their minds are still attached to ideas such as samsara is to be abandoned and nirvana is to be sought. So this essentially amounts to the cognitive obscuration that still thinks in terms of me, and in terms of me, I'd like to be out of samsara, I'd like to go into nirvana. And that, of course, still constitutes cognitive obscuration, still a subtle degree in which one fixates on the self. Simple as that. So then it says in the Sadharma Pundarika Sutra, the Arhat Shravakas, till the Buddhas call them, rest in wisdom bodies, drunk on concentration. Roused, they take on various forms and work for joy, for being's sake. Merit and wisdom gathered in, they reach the awakening of Buddhahood. So eventually then, these arhats are then aroused. They are woken from their concentration, and it's on the basis of that then they will then begin to proceed beyond just this personal peace, extend into the wider vision of actually, you could say, relinquishing the fixation on self, engaging the vision of compassion, and eventually reaching the ultimate degree of no self, which is enlightenment, in which there's spontaneously all the qualities of wisdom and compassion. And that's where then awakening stems or arises from. The Lankavatara Sutra speaks of this in a similar vein. Okay. The next is going to be the discussion of the 12 links of dependent arising. And that's a biggie too. I'll just see what the footnote says here, but I'm not really going to venture into that today. But I'd like to say I have uploaded in the resource folder, I have uploaded some material on this. I've actually, if you're seriously wanting to benefit from this, I would recommend one that I've uploaded, where it says Kenshin Trangu, his teachings on the dependent arising. There's a fair bit of material. I can't remember. It's like, probably 10 pages, if not more. But I would warmly recommend it if you have the time to please study that. And I've also, I think, uploaded, I'll check. I've uploaded a summary that I did myself some years ago in terms of these 12 links, just as also they're portrayed in what we call sometimes referred to as the wheel of life, but it's more the wheel of samsara, the wheel of existence. So in there, these 12 links, they're sometimes described in terms of a blind person stumbling along the road, somebody, a potter shaping a pot, and there's some various symbols that symbolize these 12 links. All of this is quite valuable in terms of us understanding the path. So I would recommend looking at some of the material up there in the resource folder. And then next time we'll go on to it. And it says here, the principle of dependent arising, also referred to as the law of interdependence, is one of the most important and profound of the Buddha's teachings. It describes 12 factors linked interdependently in the form of a cycle that revolves without beginning or ending. The fact that ignorance is posited as the first link does not mean that it is permanently existing first cause. It is, however, the main factor, together with craving and grasping. If this is eliminated, the entire cycle is interrupted. So I won't read more now, but that is the gist of it. And of course, that is why in everything we're doing on the Buddhist path, we are essentially addressing this condition of ignorance, or we could say unawareness. So what we're basically trying to do when we're studying is to understand, where does unawareness take place? And our assumptions around our world and ourself, are they really valid? And that's where we are essentially uprooting this unawareness or this ignorance that unfortunately is keeping us within a delusional understanding of ourselves and the world. But the Buddha's point is, as it says here, that we're not forced to be stuck in that. It's not like something that we're just always driven by. And at the end of the day, this all takes place within a condition of ignorance or unawareness. And so whenever we're studying, whenever we're practicing meditation, essentially everything we're doing is developing awareness where there was unawareness, where we're developing clarity in which there was confusion. So some important subjects, but that's why we're studying it. Okay, I'll take some questions now. We'll probably go slightly over time, but also we started a bit late. So anyway, thanks again, Narayan, for calling me up. So how should one practically approach the presence of intense physical pain in such a way that it is not through the I delusion of owner experiencer? What is the correct way that it becomes an antidote to ego clinging? This is very difficult, and it's not something that we can just say, oh yeah, I've just cottoned on to the sort of the Buddhist notion of no self, so I'm going to get over the pain. It takes time, and that's where you could say when we encounter pain, then yes, the first thing we can do is practice patience and begin to be a little bit open to, you could say, discomfort. But it's not about masochism. It's more about us actually having awareness or a spirit of inquiry in which the experience of pain happens, but is, again, this is where we can analyze, is there the me that is sort of, it can be anything from having a cold shower to, maybe having burnt our hand to whatever, discomfort of various kinds, where we can actually just interject awareness. We can analyze and we can say, is this pain, is it me? And we can apply all the reflections that we have today. And we can also simply just settle within awareness in which just we're patient about it. This is very different from when, I remember as a teenager, I had an accident where I smashed my big toe. And my mother, who was normally very compassionate, we went to the emergency ward, and I was in excruciating pain. I couldn't help but writhe, sort of where you're going. And my mother was a bit embarrassed, and she would say, "Come on, get a grip." My ordinarily kind, compassionate mother, there I was in complete agony, and she was like, "Please get a grip." And I would say, "Good on her." But that's where we sometimes have that moralistic thing, like, let's just, get a handle on this, and that's fine too. But what, of course, we're doing here is more than just sort of, you could say, essentially suppressing or whatever, handling ourselves. It's more about interjecting awareness, and also on the basis of this analysis. But it's not as if there's just like a quick cure. Of course, we sometimes have, like, for example, in yoga and so forth, you have the practice of pratyahara, where you actually go into the pain. And if you can do that very well, same thing, interject awareness. But it is continually about us you could say, not all of a sudden flipping into a complete way of coming out of this, but essentially applying what we're reading here. Hi, did you do Appendix 4? There's an asterisk at the bottom of page 174 referring to the five skandhas. No, I didn't, but that's very good, very helpful. Okay, well, maybe I would say look at that, please. Look at the Appendix 4 then. Very good. I hadn't seen that properly. That's wonderful. So another one. Sorry. Okay, if you must. Must one perform actions directly opposite to self-perception in the real world order to burst the bubble? No, you don't really need to do that. It's not as if all of a sudden we're saying, what would I like to do? Well, I'm going to do the exact opposite. It's not really like that. It's much gentler than that. And that would really just, you'd say, amount to another sort of extreme. But we can be playful about it. It's more that when the unwanted happens, that we more sort of just, that we're cool with it, you know? Somebody brings us tea instead of coffee. We just say, oh, all right, well, maybe I'll just have a tea after all, you know? That sort of thing. Somebody brings us the dish that we hadn't ordered. We go, okay, well, you know, I'll try that, that sort of thing. Or we come home and we realize that the key is locked inside our apartment. Again, handle it with patience. So it's not as if, you know, we need to subject ourselves to various kinds of, you could say, self-denial, really. So it says, is that what we need to do, or can one meaningfully realize fiction through intellectual understanding and direct perception and meditation? Must the self necessarily be challenged in real-world moments? Oh, yes, very much. But like I say, not about, you could say, inflicting, you know, acts of self, you know, not about torturing ourselves or making ourselves discomfortable, but very much when the sort of the unwanted circumstances happen. Contemplating reality, that's what it's called. Thank you. Thank you, that's right. Andy Carr's work. Is book 1 to be read in isolation in relation to view, or is it written in a way that points toward the view in point 2? Oh yeah. This is all foundation for book 2. The teachings on the sutras are basic to the teachings that we had in the mantra, the Vajrayana. So yes, this is especially like teachings like no self, dependent arising, and so forth. That's absolutely essential, really, for the practice of the Vajrayana, the mantra teachings. Why does Chandrakirti refer to the views as lofty peaks? Because they're so big and powerful in our lives. You know, these 20 peaks are the 4 ways in which we attribute self to the skandhas. They're huge. You know, like again, coming back to the getting the dish you didn't order. I don't like that, you know, and that's where there's attributing self to the body, to the mind, and the whole sort of solidification. You know, I am this feeling, you know, and so all of these, they rule our lives. So we talk about them as lofty peaks in the sense of that they dominate the landscape. How do we do a formal meditation session on the emptiness of the 5 aggregates? Any material you recommend? We do this whenever we practice any meditation. Any meditation that you find in the Buddhist path implicitly does this. So of course we can understand it in terms of sitting meditation. The mere fact that we don't perpetuate the ordinary fascination and unaware the unaware way in which we're carried away and absorbed by our thinking. So already there we begin to discover a degree of awareness that is not entangled in our ordinary projections. It's when we are unaware that we then begin to engage in all these practices of likes and dislikes and essentially construct all these various aspects of the self. So that's where you could say the practice of sitting meditation works. Also when we practice Vajrayana meditation of deity, that's coming from the place of the selflessness that is in no way entangled by any of our ordinary dualistic psychological phenomena. But in terms of us approaching this the way we are doing it right now, this is more in what we call analytical meditation. And that's where, in terms of us then meditating on this, essentially we can go through these exercises like we were just looking at. Actually, I'll upload, I might already have, yes, I have already uploaded that thing that where I was looking at before, the 4 ways in which we can analyze the relationship to the various skandhas. So that's uploaded there. And that's something where we can sit down just quietly and think, the body and the mind, the body that I look into the mirror and saying, gosh, I look awful, or gosh, I look great, or this, that, or the other. Isn't it interesting that I take this as being solidly me? And that's where that kind of contemplation is then what we call analytical meditation. So it's part of vipassana, it's part of, you'd say, developing a wider perspective, but it is essentially analytical. So this is one way of approaching vipassana. The other is, like I said before, when we do sitting practice and just sit, in which we don't get entangled in unawareness, that's what we call settling meditation. Okay, so we went a little bit over time, but also yours truly came late, so only fair enough. So thank you for your patience at the beginning of class, and next time we'll look at the 12 links of dependent origination. So please have a look at the text, and if possible, please also look at some of the uploaded material in the resource folder. So thank you very much. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you.